When Catherine stepped out wearing the Queen Mary choker, royal watchers celebrated elegance. But inside palace walls, phones rang within minutes. Courtiers didn't admire it, they froze. Because this was not just a historic jewel. It was a restricted piece. One that had quietly disappeared from circulation decades earlier. And what shocked insiders most wasn't that she wore it, but that she wore it without clearance. To the public, it looked like continuity. A young princess honoring heritage. Inside the institution, it looked like a decision someone had not approved. The difference between those two interpretations mattered more than the necklace itself. Within minutes of the appearance circulating among press desks, internal lines began to move quietly, carefully, almost defensively. No raised voices, no confrontations, just the controlled urgency that signals a problem no one wants to admit exists. Before we start, your support through a like and subscribe means a lot. Thank you. The first call reportedly didn't come from the fashion office. It came from administrative staff responsible for allocation records, the quiet ledgers that track not beauty, but permission. Every royal jewel exists within a structure of custody, and this one had long been placed into a category that required awareness at a level higher than styling preference. The reappearance forced senior aides to check the archives the same evening, not to admire the choice, but to confirm whether the choice had ever been granted. What they found unsettled them. Catherine's name had never been included among its anticipated future wearers. Not excluded, but not listed either. In royal terms, that absence is louder than prohibition. It means the decision belongs to someone above ordinary hierarchy. The choker carried memory. Not sentimental memory, but institutional memory. The kind attached to delicate moments, fragile periods, private negotiations the public never knew occurred. That history had placed it into a restricted category decades earlier. A quiet understanding among senior staff that some objects carry emotional consequences when reintroduced. By the time evening approached, another message moved through the corridors. The Queen's private dresser had contacted the keeper of the jewels. That step alone revealed the seriousness. Normally, wardrobe questions remain within wardrobe channels. Escalation meant interpretation, not fashion. Aides later described the atmosphere as controlled stillness, the kind that replaces panic in environments trained never to display it. The question no one asked aloud was the one everyone was considering. Who authorized it? Because within this system, two possibilities existed. Either approval had come from a level above them all, or Catherine herself had stepped unknowingly into a boundary defined only by tradition and memory. The first appearance might have been coincidence. The palace could absorb coincidence. But the fact that it happened at all forced the institution to look backward, not forward, toward precedent, toward meaning, toward the last time the jewel had spoken louder than words. But to understand why the palace reacted so quickly, you have to go back to the woman who turned this choker into a symbol no royal wanted to mishandle. Queen Mary never categorized jewels by beauty. She categorized them by stability. Some pieces strengthened the crown. Others destabilized it. The choker belonged to a rare third category. Inheritance sensitive. It wasn't locked away, but it was never freely offered either. Passed only under specific emotional conditions, it quietly became a barometer of trust inside the royal women's hierarchy. Inside the monarchy, jewelry has always functioned as language long before it functioned as decoration. Queen Mary understood that appearances could calm a nation or quietly expose fractures within a family. So she built a private system, not written in official inventories, but remembered by those entrusted to serve across generations. Certain pieces were ceremonial, others celebratory. and a very small number were conditional. The choker lived in that uncertain space. Her internal guidelines were never announced, yet they governed decades of decisions. When harmony prevailed, the jewel might appear. When tension simmered, it remained absent. Over time, staff stopped asking why and simply learned when. Royal dressers were not merely tasked with fastening clasps. They were briefed on what a selection implied, how it would be read, and what expectations followed once it was worn. The wearer did not just represent herself. She represented stability. The symbolism attached to the choker grew gradually, almost invisibly. It became associated with marital balance, with reassurance to a watching public that continuity remained intact. Whenever uncertainty surrounded the monarchy, the appearance of the piece acted like a quiet announcement. The structure still held. And because of that meaning, it skipped individuals who, on paper, outranked others. Rank mattered less than context. In private records, aides allegedly noted it as context-dependent. Not forbidden, not assigned, dependent. That distinction mattered enormously. It meant no single generation owned the right to wear it automatically. Approval was emotional, not hierarchical. The crown could elevate a person overnight, but it would not automatically entrust them with a symbol that carried delicate implications. The most experienced attendants came to treat the choker with a kind of caution normally reserved for sensitive correspondence. Before a wearing, conversations occurred. Expectations were outlined. The message it conveyed had to match the moment the monarchy wished to project. When unity needed reinforcement, the jewel emerged. When unity needed protection, it disappeared. Over decades, this created a pattern the public never consciously noticed but always felt. Its appearances coincided with consolidation. Marriages settling, disputes quieting, transitions stabilizing. The absence of it, equally deliberate, allowed the institution to avoid attaching reassurance to uncertain circumstances. Stability, not personality, determined access. That is why Catherine's unexpected selection unsettled those who remembered the old system. She had not merely chosen a historic ornament. She had stepped into a language defined long before her arrival. Whether intentional or not, the act carried weight beyond elegance, and the palace knew from experience that once meaning attaches to a jewel, it rarely lets go. Which is why decades later, when another princess wore it during a fragile chapter in royal history, the jewel gained a reputation no one could ignore. Before Catherine, another princess transformed the choker from symbol into signal. Each time she wore it, headlines followed. And behind palace doors, tensions escalated. What began as ceremonial elegance evolved into a quiet act of communication between a princess and an institution that preferred silence. After her final appearance in the piece, the choker vanished from public life entirely. At first, no one recognized the pattern. The jewel appeared at formal engagements, and observers assumed tradition had simply continued. But within the household, timing mattered more than occasion. The princess chose it not during comfortable moments, but during uneasy ones, after difficult meetings, during strained tours, and in the aftermath of conversations the public would never hear. Slowly, the choker stopped being interpreted as heritage and began to feel like commentary. Aides began noting the dates privately. Not officially, never written into permanent logs, but remembered. When disagreements surfaced internally, the necklace surfaced publicly. It was never accompanied by statements, yet it spoke anyway. The monarchy valued controlled messaging, carefully managed appearances, and emotional restraint. The princess, however, had discovered a language that required no permission. To those close enough to notice, the pattern felt deliberate. The jewel carried the monarchy's promise of unity, Yet its presence during moments of visible tension reframed that promise. Instead of reassurance, it suggested negotiation. The institution preferred silence. The princess answered with symbolism. And because neither side acknowledged it openly, the meaning only deepened. Over time, staff adjusted behavior around it. When wardrobes were discussed, some waited to see if it would be selected before drawing conclusions about the mood of the week. Private secretaries began paying attention not to speeches, but to jewelry trays. What once reflected stability now hinted at emotional distance. The piece had become what one aide later described as a conversation starter without words. Eventually, the tension reached a point where the symbolism could no longer remain unaddressed, though it was never addressed publicly. Instead, the solution arrived quietly. After a final appearance that stirred particular unease behind closed doors, the choker disappeared from circulation. No announcement explained it. No correction acknowledged it. It was simply no longer offered. A private understanding followed. The jewel would be rested indefinitely. Future use would require senior-level awareness, not merely selection. The monarchy had learned that objects could accumulate meaning beyond intention, and this one had gathered too much. Within the household, it became psychologically sensitive, less an heirloom than a reminder of unresolved conversations. Years passed, and new generations entered the institution unaware of how deeply the association lingered. Yet among those who remembered, the piece retained its reputation. It had once represented unity, then defiance, and finally negotiation. A silent exchange between personal feeling and institutional control. So when Catherine selected it years later, not once, but twice, insiders didn't see coincidence. They saw messaging. The first appearance seemed harmless. A diplomatic event, a controlled setting, a respectful nod to tradition. But royal staff noticed subtle deviations, timing, pairing choices, and seating arrangements. Nothing improper, yet nothing accidental either. For those trained to read royal signaling, Catherine wasn't just honoring history. She was participating in it. On paper, the occasion called for something safer. Other jewels carried clearer ceremonial meaning, pieces historically selected for neutrality, items designed to prevent interpretation rather than invite it. Yet the choker arrived instead, quietly redirecting attention among those who understood its past. The public saw elegance. The institution saw a sentence written in a language only a few still spoke fluently. Inside the reception, reactions remained disciplined. No one questioned the choice openly. But glances moved where words could not. Senior figures, who rarely reacted to wardrobe selections, paused just long enough to acknowledge recognition. The moment passed quickly, almost invisibly, yet the awareness settled heavily beneath polite conversation. What intensified the reading was not only the jewel itself, but what accompanied it. It was paired with selections that softened some meanings and sharpened others, shifting interpretation from tribute toward intention. In the monarchy, combinations matter. A single piece may reference history, but the surrounding choices determine whether that reference comforts or challenges. This combination leaned toward statement. Externally, coverage praised grace and continuity. Internally, staff recorded details. Not criticism, observation. The palace rarely responds to a first occurrence. It watches. Notes were logged, quietly circulated through private channels that exist to prevent misunderstandings from becoming conflicts. The appearance tested boundaries without forcing confrontation. No correction followed. No guidance was issued. Silence became the response, and silence in such moments carries its own instruction. Wait and see. If it never happened again, it could be dismissed as coincidence. If repeated, it would become intention. Those familiar with precedent expected the former. The monarchy survives by discouraging escalation, and most within it instinctively retreat from symbols that once carried tension. Yet the effect lingered beyond the event. Conversations turned speculative behind closed doors. Had the selection been advised? Had the historical associations been fully explained? Or had Catherine understood them perfectly and chosen to proceed anyway? No one pressed the question, because pressing it would acknowledge that a message might exist. So the institution held its breath and trusted pattern to reassert itself. The jewel would return to rest. Tradition would absorb the moment. Time would reduce meaning back into decoration. Then, weeks later, Catherine wore it again. And that's when the quiet concern became urgent. The second wearing changed everything. Within an hour of photographs circulating, a senior household office contacted the wardrobe department. Not a suggestion, an instruction. The choker was to be logged, secured, and not scheduled again. No explanation offered. No public acknowledgement given. But inside the palace, everyone understood. This was no longer fashion diplomacy. This had become a boundary. The message did not travel loudly. It moved with the calm precision reserved for matters that must never appear dramatic. A brief phrase surfaced in internal communication. Usage clarification. Neutral wording, carefully chosen, yet its meaning was unmistakable. Clarification in royal language rarely refers to confusion. It refers to control being quietly re-established. Inventory procedures followed almost immediately. Pieces normally transferred through routine wardrobe channels were now documented with unusual attention. Signatures requested. Timings confirmed. Storage verified. None of this suggested punishment, but none of it suggested coincidence either. The system had tightened around a single object, as if history itself had reached forward to steady an uncertain present. Catherine's team received notice soon after. Polite, impeccably phrased, entirely formal, and completely firm. Future scheduling would exclude the choker. No accusation accompanied the instruction, only the unmistakable implication that its appearances had crossed into territory reserved for institutional decision rather than personal selection. The absence of explanation made the point stronger than any justification could have. Publicly, nothing changed. No correction was issued. No clarification offered to journalists eager for commentary. Silence protected the crown from questions, and questions were exactly what the household intended to avoid. A denial would create a story. An explanation would create sides. Silence created stability. Yet the urgency hinted at authority beyond ordinary protocol. Wardrobe departments can recommend. Senior aides can advise, but only a very small circle can restrict. Those who observed the speed of the response understood that the instruction had not originated where clothing choices are normally discussed. It had come from somewhere higher, somewhere that considered symbolism not aesthetic but constitutional. Among staff, interpretations divided quietly. Some believed the intervention protective, shielding Catherine from associations she may not have intended. Others sensed restriction, a reminder that certain languages within the monarchy require consent before being spoken. Neither view was voiced openly, because acknowledging either would admit the choker had meaning powerful enough to demand intervention. The result was immediate and absolute. The piece vanished from future planning, removed not dramatically but efficiently, replaced by options whose histories carried less emotional weight. Conversations shifted from speculation about Catherine's intention to speculation about authority itself. Who had acted so decisively, and why now? Behind composed expressions, the atmosphere tightened. Not hostile, not chaotic, simply aware. Everyone present recognized that an invisible line had been approached, and gently pushed back into place. The event had ended, but the interpretation had only begun. But the real mystery wasn't the order. It was who had the power to issue it. Royal jewels don't belong to individuals. They belong to a layered authority system few outsiders understand. A princess may wear them, but she doesn't control them. Requests, approvals, sensitivities, and historical memory all pass through unseen custodians. And sometimes, the denial of a jewel carries more meaning than any speech ever could. Within the monarchy, ownership is an illusion carefully maintained for the public. The wearer appears to choose, but the institution decides what choice is possible. Beneath the elegance sits a structure designed not around beauty, but around continuity. Each piece exists inside a chain of guardianship, and at its center stands a figure few ever notice: the keeper of the jewels. Independent of stylists, independent even of daily household staff, this role answers not to preference, but to preservation. Their task is not fashion, it is memory. Some items pass easily through this system. Others pause. A small category requires something harder to define: emotional context approval. That approval is rarely written, rarely spoken directly, yet unmistakably understood among those who have served long enough. The choker lived inside that category. Not forbidden, but sensitive. Not restricted by rank, but by meaning accumulated over time. Allocation decisions therefore rarely followed simple hierarchy. Seniority could request, tradition could suggest, but interpersonal dynamics often decided. The monarchy survives by balancing relationships as much as responsibilities, and objects tied to past tensions remain carefully managed. When a jewel carries echoes of disagreement, allowing it to reappear without alignment risks reopening conversations the institution has already chosen to quiet. Because wearing such a piece never functions as decoration alone. It can imply endorsement. It can imply challenge. The same object can comfort one audience and unsettle another depending on timing. That dual power explains why removal is often preventative rather than corrective. The system acts before misunderstanding forms, not after conflict erupts. In this language, absence communicates more cleanly than explanation. A jewel disappears, and speculation dissolves before it can solidify. The monarchy has long relied on that method. It does not argue narratives. It guides them away from forming. Access, therefore, becomes a subtle map of internal alignment, understood only by those trained to notice which heirlooms remain available and which quietly retreat. For Catherine, the instruction carried no accusation because accusation would imply wrongdoing. Instead, the adjustment reasserted equilibrium. The object returned to supervised status, and with it, the conversation returned to silence. No statement needed to be issued because the institution had already spoken in the clearest language it trusts: restraint. To outsiders, the event seemed trivial. To insiders, it reaffirmed that the crown protects itself through symbols as carefully as through words. Meaning is not debated publicly, it is managed privately. And when management occurs, it rarely addresses the action alone. It addresses interpretation, which raises the uncomfortable possibility. The order wasn't about Catherine breaking rules, but about what her choice represented. Inside the monarchy, meaning matters more than intent. Catherine may have chosen the choker for continuity, but interpretation defines consequence. And in an institution built on symbolism, two appearances suggested a position. Not declared, not spoken, but unmistakably read by those trained to decode royal behavior. Within palace culture, repetition is never neutral. A single appearance invites curiosity. A second creates narrative. Those who had watched the earlier generation understood immediately why the pattern unsettled senior figures. The jewel did not merely belong to history, it belonged to a role once shaped by a princess whose relationship with the institution had been complicated, influential, and emotionally charged. By wearing it again, Catherine unintentionally stepped into that shadow, or perhaps into its expectations. Among observers inside the household, interpretations divided quietly. Some read reassurance, a signal of continuity between past and present, suggesting stability within the family structure. Others sensed assertion, a subtle claim of voice within a system that rarely rewards individuality. Both readings carried risk. The monarchy depends not on eliminating interpretation, but on controlling it. And two appearances in close succession made control more difficult. The second, wearing erased ambiguity. What could have been dismissed as homage now appeared deliberate, whether or not that had been the intention. In royal life, perception shapes reality. If the narrative formed publicly, the institution would be forced into a response, and response is precisely what it avoids whenever possible. So the order did not attempt to correct the past, it prevented the future. By quietly removing the choker from rotation, the palace stopped a story before it could develop patterns in press coverage. The monarchy has learned over decades that repetition invites questions, and questions create sides. Silence, however, dissolves momentum. Catherine's acceptance of that silence preserved equilibrium. No explanation from her, no clarification from them. Stability restored not through confrontation, but through absence. Afterward, attention shifted away from the jewel exactly as intended. Without continued appearances, speculation lost direction. The public never knew a conversation had occurred because the conversation never reached them. Inside the household, however, understanding settled into place. The meaning had been acknowledged, then carefully closed. This is how the institution protects itself, through controlled ambiguity. Nothing denied, nothing confirmed, yet everything guided. Catherine neither resisted nor explained, and in doing so, she aligned with the deeper rule. Sometimes the strongest statement a royal can make is restraint. The choker's disappearance carried more clarity than any announcement ever could. And that silence created the final mystery. What changed after the order was given? After the second appearance, the choker vanished again. No controversy, no denial, no clarification, just absence. And yet insiders noticed something subtle, a shift in jewelry selections, event tone, and internal positioning. Nothing dramatic. But in royal language, restraint often signals agreement. The removal did not create headlines because it was never meant to. The monarchy rarely corrects events publicly when it can redirect them privately. In the weeks that followed, Catherine's appearances continued exactly as before, yet never quite the same. Different heirlooms emerged, elegant, historically respected, but carrying none of the complicated echoes attached to the choker. Each selection reassured without inviting interpretation. The message was calm, careful, deliberate. Those familiar with palace patterns understood immediately. The absence confirmed acceptance. Not submission, not defeat, alignment. The institution had drawn a boundary, and Catherine had stepped back without resistance. In doing so, she reinforced a deeper rule that governs royal survival. Harmony is maintained not by winning disputes, but by preventing them from becoming visible. Public messaging reflected that shift. Engagements emphasized unity themes. Speeches leaned toward continuity. The atmosphere surrounding appearances softened, as if tension that never reached the outside world had quietly settled within it. Nothing explained this adjustment, yet its consistency spoke clearly to those trained to notice change without announcement. Within the household, The incident became a quiet lesson passed through tone rather than instruction. New staff observed how quickly meaning could gather around an object and how gently it could be dispersed. The choker returned to its supervised category, neither banished nor accessible, existing again in the careful balance it had occupied for generations. Its power lay precisely in the fact that it was not forbidden, only understood. Both sides preserved dignity through silence. The palace avoided confrontation, and Catherine avoided interpretation. No correction required apology because no accusation had been made. Instead, the monarchy performed its most practiced act: negotiation without acknowledgement. An action answered by adjustment. A message answered by restraint. Over time, memory softened the memory of urgency, but not its lesson. Royal history has long relied on this pattern. Symbols rise, meanings gather, then equilibrium restores itself through quiet agreement. The crown endures not by eliminating tension, but by guiding it into forms the public never recognizes as resolution. The choker's brief return, and equally brief disappearance, became another chapter in that tradition. Not scandal, not rebellion, simply a reminder that even within ceremony, communication continues beneath the surface. Stability was preserved, relationships remained intact, and the institution moved forward exactly as it always intends to, without revealing the conversation that made it possible. In the monarchy, statements are rarely spoken. They are worn, removed, and remembered.